Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. The afternoon fell over the city in a thin mist-like rain, just enough to slow everything down, soften the edges, as if the world had collectively decided not to rush anyone anymore. The cafe on the corner turned on its warm yellow lights earlier than usual, their glow reflecting off fogged-up windows, bouncing off slick streets, and the strangers hurrying past one another's lives. Lila Brooks sat in the last booth against the wall, a spot discreet enough to avoid making eye contact with anyone if she didn't want to. She slouched deliberately, shoulders relaxed, spine not quite straight, letting her body occupy space in a careless, uninterested way. She wore a faded gray sweatshirt, one size too big, belonging to some long-gone winter, that now served only one purpose: lowering expectations to absolute zero. Her hair was gathered in a messy bun, not the curated, effortless kind, but the I don't care enough to try kind. A few strands fell against her neck and cheeks, but she didn't bother fixing them. Her face was bare, no lipstick, no foundation, nothing to hide the exhaustion etched into her features after a full day of teaching. Her jeans were old, frayed at the hem, and right at the knee was a tiny blue ink stain, the aftermath of a chaotic art period with 25 8-year-olds and an exploding ballpoint pen. Lila stared down at the cup of coffee in front of her. Steam rose thin and ghost-like before dissolving into the air. She took a sip, let the pleasant bitterness settle on her tongue, then exhaled softly. Perfect. She had planned this afternoon meticulously, even standing in front of the mirror for a few minutes to ensure she didn't accidentally look cute in any capacity. 3.5 years after her engagement had collapsed, leaving her bank account empty, a debt she still hadn't finished paying, and her trust shattered. Lila had no patience left for dates framed as maybe this time will be different. She preferred a strategy far simpler and far more efficient. Dress badly. Don't try. Don't polish anything. If the man across from her stood up within the first 10 minutes with some polite excuse, she considered it a win. Less time wasted, less hope wasted, less going home wondering how she did everything right and still ended up wrong. Dress terribly equals filter out the money hunters, Lila thought, a faint self-mocking smile tugging at her lips. The strategy had never failed her. She glanced at her phone again. No new messages from Maya, who had enthusiastically arranged this date with a dramatic assurance, "He's just a nice guy." No drama. Lila could practically picture her somewhere, anxiously awaiting the status report. Has he run yet? Leela had barely set her phone down when the cafe door chimed. Clear, bright, slicing through the low music. A few people looked up. Lila did too, more by habit than curiosity, and her gaze lingered longer than she intended. The man who walked in did not match the script in her head. He was tall, but not in an attention-demanding way. His frame was lean, clothed in simple, well-tailored pieces that revealed their quality only when you looked closely. His dark hair was neatly combed, with a few silver strands at his temples, catching the warm light. Not aging him, but giving him an air of steadiness, of experience. He paused, scanned the cafe, and then his eyes stopped on Lila. The moment was brief, almost negligible, yet something in her routine shifted, just a millimeter, but enough to be alarming. He didn't gloss over her. He didn't assess. He saw her, then smiled, not the polite kind or the just confirming your identity kind, but something that landed soft, warm, and real. Reflexively, Lila looked down at herself, the faded sweatshirt, the ink stain, the uncorrected bun. Absolutely not. The man walked toward her, each step unhurried but certain, as if the possibility of being wrong didn't occur to him. When he stopped at her table, Lila realized she'd been holding her breath. Lila! His voice was deep, clear, not too low, not artificially smooth. She didn't stand, just shrugged. If you're looking for someone who looks different, you've got the wrong girl. He chuckled softly, pulling out the chair and sitting down without hesitation, as if all of this made perfect sense, and her outfit didn't exist. No, he said. I'm pretty sure I'm in the right place. Lila narrowed her eyes, studying him like an equation missing half its variables. You're not surprised? Surprised by what? That I don't look like a date, she replied bluntly. His gaze moved over her briefly before resting on her eyes, where he seemed to find something he recognized. Maybe I'm not here for someone who looks like a template, he said. Lila laughed, more naturally than she intended. Fine, let me make this easier. If you want to leave, go ahead. I won't be offended. He tilted his head, genuinely considering, then asked in a calm voice, why would I leave? Because I'm dressed like this? And? Lila blinked, then decided to be honest. It's a tactic. I dress badly to see who has the patience to stay. He laughed outright, warm and unguarded. In that case, he said, eyes never leaving hers, I suppose I've passed the first round. Outside, the rain kept falling steadily, like a soundtrack no one asked for, but everyone accepted. They ordered their drinks. And for the first time in years, Lila realized she didn't want this date to end early. Inside the cafe, the flow of customers slowed. The air settled, warm and soft like the old blanket Lila wrapped around herself every winter night. The scent of freshly brewed coffee, the hint of cinnamon from the pastry tray near the counter, the quiet clink of a spoon against a cup. All of it blended into a backdrop just gentle enough for the two people sitting across from each other to forget that an entire world was still moving outside. So, Lila cleared her throat, her fingers turning the handle of her cup. I've told you about my dating defense strategy. It doesn't sound very smart. On the contrary, Ethan said, leaning back slightly in his chair, I appreciate people who are upfront from the start. Saves time. Like a business contract? Lila narrowed her eyes and he smiled. Hopefully, more pleasant than a business contract. That depends, she replied, one corner of her mouth lifting. So tell me, what do you do? Or is that also a strategic secret? Not a secret, he said, then paused briefly as if choosing his words. I work in corporate consulting, restructuring, optimization, things that sound very dry. Definitely sounds dry, Lila nodded sympathetically. But the money probably isn't. He laughed. I see you're very practical. I teach basic math to 8-year-olds. Practicality is part of the job. Ethan paused. You're a teacher? Yeah. 3rd grade, Maplewood Elementary, 4 blocks from here. Her voice softened unconsciously when she mentioned the school. Every day starts with settling who sits next to whom and ends with a war over the purple crayon. More interesting than restructuring, if you ask me. Definitely more interesting, he said, and this time Lila could tell he meant it, not just polite conversation. Can I ask, Anna, why kids? You don't seem like the type who enjoys making life hard for herself. Thanks, Lila laughed. I like being the only adult in the room who can still draw smiley faces on the board with chalk and not be judged. And kids are interesting. They don't pretend to be better than they are, as adults do. Ethan tilted his head, studying her, his eyes carrying a look like he was threading small details together. I get it now. Get what? She asked. Your eyes, he said, as if he discovered something simple but important. When you talk about corporate consulting, they get a little polite. But when you say 3rd grade, he shrugged slightly, they light up. Lila felt her face warm, and she hated that. Maybe because I like kids more than restructuring. I also like hearing you talk about kids more than hearing about restructuring, he replied so sincerely that she couldn't help but laugh. So what did Maya tell you about me? She asked a little cautiously. That you're stubborn, of modest height, have a difficult cat, and prefer true crime podcasts to inspirational ones. He raised an eyebrow. I prepared myself. She said I'm short? Lila stared. I'll deal with her later. She said petite, Ethan corrected. I translated that as small but dangerous. That made Lila laugh out loud, the sound echoing through the quiet space enough that she quickly covered her mouth, as if she'd broken some unspoken rule. Ethan was watching her with the look of someone who just noted another interesting data point. And you? She asked, tossing the ball back. What kind of person are you, besides someone who sits calmly in front of an old sweatshirt? The kind who is very, very tired of people changing their tone once they hear what I do for a living. He looked down at his coffee, his palm turning the ceramic cup as if he were used to saying this. I've had dates where the moment I say consulting, asset management, their voice immediately gets softer, their smile jumps up 2 levels. Maybe they genuinely like asset management, Lila said, pretending to be serious. If they asked me about bonds or stocks, I'd buy that, he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting. But they only ask about cars, yachts, and vacation homes. No one asks whether I actually enjoy my job. Lila rested her elbow on the table, her chin on the back of her hand, looking at him a little longer. So, do you enjoy it? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Ethan was silent for a few seconds, as if checking inward, rather than pulling out a ready-made answer. Some days, he said slowly, I like solving problems. I like seeing a system run smoothly. But some days I wish things were as simple as a third-grade math problem you can fix with a red pen. You'd be disappointed, Lila shook her head. 8-year-olds can turn a simple addition problem into an emotional disaster in 30 seconds. Who's wrong? Who's right? Who sits next to whom? Who touched whose eraser? More drama than reality TV. Spoken like someone experienced, Ethan observed. I deserve a medal, she replied, making him laugh again. After a moment, he leaned back, his gaze still fixed on her. I should confess something if you don't mind. As long as you're not confessing you're a wanted criminal, Lila said. I'm having a pretty decent afternoon. Don't worry, he replied. I'm not that interesting. He paused, then continued. When I walked in, I thought, if this date turns out like the others, I'll find an excuse to leave early. I'm a little tired of the pretend interest, then voice change because of my job routine. And yet you're still here, Lila said. Maybe my bad dressing strategy worked in reverse. Exactly, Ethan said, and this time his smile held a warmer note, like fresh heat rising in the air. I saw a woman sitting here in an old sweatshirt, hair pulled up like she'd been fighting a pillow, no armor on, and I thought, at least this person isn't trying to sell me an edited version of herself. Lila went quiet for a beat, then exhaled, feeling something loosen in her chest. You know what's funny? Half the reason I dress like this is to make people leave quickly. The other half is that I'm just too tired to try. Then, Ethan said softly, it seems I got lucky today. The barista turned on the coffee grinder, a brief burst of noise before it faded again. A group of students left the cafe, their laughter carried in a light breeze that made the small sign on the door tremble. Time stretched and shrank inside that warm little box until Lila glanced up at the wall clock behind the counter and blinked in surprise. Don't tell me the clock's broken, she said, or that we've stepped into some kind of secret time zone? Ethan turned to follow her gaze. Has it really been over 2 hours? Yeah, she laughed, shaking her head slightly. I planned to sit for exactly half an hour, go home, eat instant noodles, and listen to a true crime podcast. My plan has clearly been ruined. If you need, I can apologize on my own behalf, he said, still half joking. But I don't regret it. Lila looked at him, and in that moment, she realized she didn't regret letting her carefully planned failed date fail either. She didn't feel evaluated, didn't feel like she was in an interview, didn't need to think of the right answer. Just 2 people, coffee, rain, and the feeling that life had grown lighter for a few hours. He set his cup down, fingers tapping lightly against the rim, as if gathering courage for his next words. Lila? Yeah? I don't want this to be just a memorable date and then nothing, Ethan said plainly, without detours. I want to see you again, not in a we'll see way, but because I genuinely want to continue this conversation. Her heart gave a small jolt, but her voice stayed calm. You know that according to my strategy rules, you've officially passed the sweatshirt round, right? I'll frame the certificate if you print it for me, he replied. She looked away for a second, out through the rain-blurred window, then back at him. Okay, but next time I choose the place, somewhere I feel comfortable, not somewhere that makes me worry whether I dress correctly. Completely reasonable, he said without hesitation. Anywhere you like. A restaurant, a park, a bookstore, a zoo, an empty classroom, as long as you're comfortable. Are you trying to get yourself killed? Lila laughed. I might choose somewhere very weird. I can handle it, Ethan said, his eyes steady on her face. As long as you're there. The words landed between them, light but clear. Lila didn't answer right away. She only felt something simple. This man, at least in this rain-softened moment by the window, wasn't seeing the sweatshirt, wasn't seeing the ink stains, wasn't seeing the defenses she'd built. He was looking straight at the woman sitting across from him, with eyes that no longer believed in miracles, but still had enough courage to try again. And for the first time in a very long while, Lila heard a small, very small sound inside herself, like an old hinge being oiled. A door, slowly, beginning to open. Saturday morning opened with a rare, pale sunshine after days of rain. Light filtered through the trees lining the street and lingered on the sidewalk just long enough to convince people that today might actually be pleasant. The used book fair had taken over the small square in front of the city library. Rows of wooden tables stacked high with books whose covers were worn, spines cracked, the scent of old paper blending with to-go coffee, and the sweetness of pastries from a nearby cart. Lila arrived 10 minutes early. She stood at the edge of the square, clutching her canvas tote, letting her breathing settle before stepping in. Today she was dressed neater than at the cafe, but still herself. A light cream sweater, dark jeans with no ink stains, soft-soled flats. Her hair was loose, with a small braid tucked behind one ear. No real makeup, just enough to look awake. When her reflection glanced back at her from the library's glass door, she saw a familiar version of herself, not hiding, not trying to impress. Just me, but slightly more put together, she thought, and found that perfectly acceptable. Ethan appeared from the parking lot, easy to spot even among the crowd. He wore blue jeans and a forest green Henley, the sleeves pushed up, revealing strong wrists. No jacket, no flashy watch, no signs of someone seeking attention. When he saw Lila, his eyes lit up in that now familiar way, not rushed, not appraising, and the smile followed, slowing her steps by half a beat. "Hi," he said once he reached her, voice warm and unhurried like the morning itself. "I was afraid I might be late." "You're early," Lila replied. "I'm just mentally preparing myself for getting lost between book tables." "Sounds like a pleasant accident," Ethan said, glancing around. "This place suits you." "You've met me twice," she raised an eyebrow. "You jump to conclusions that fast?" "Not conclusions," he grinned. "Predictions. I predict you like places that offer people permission to slow down." Lila didn't argue. She led him along the first row of tables where old mystery novels were stacked in an order only the vendor understood. They stopped at a table covered in detective stories. Hand-drawn covers, retro fonts, some with prices written in pencil on the first page. "Here we are," Lila said as if claiming her territory. "Heaven!" Ethan leaned in. "You sound very sure." "Classic mysteries," she explained. "They're not really about who killed whom. They're about what people don't say and why." He picked one up, flipped a few pages, eyes focused. "Sounds like a life lesson." "Exactly," Lila nodded. "I think that's why I like them. They teach you to listen to the empty spaces." Ethan paused, then smiled. "Now I understand why that coffee date went by so quickly." "Because I talk too much?" "Because you know when to stop," he said. "Not everyone does." They moved slowly from table to table, stopping to skim lines, for Lila to introduce a writer, or for Ethan to question a bizarre book cover he'd found. Their conversation required no effort. It found its own rhythm, weaving through titles, odd anecdotes, and quiet moments that didn't need filling. "Do you read a lot of mysteries?" Lila asked when they reached a stack of dark-covered novels. "A bit," Ethan replied. "I like how they make you observe more closely. It's similar to my job. Sometimes the most important part is what isn't written in the report." Lila glanced at him, realizing she'd wandered near a boundary, and stopped herself. "Your work," she repeated lightly, "sounds like it takes up a lot of your time." "Enough to make me appreciate mornings like this," he said. His voice wasn't evasive, but it didn't invite further questions either. A neat, polite boundary, one Lila respected. "Fair," she said. "I'm not about to give you a full rundown of my classroom on the second meeting either." He smiled as if he appreciated the unspoken agreement. They continued until they reached a crate set low on the ground. Lila bent down just as Ethan did, their shoulders brushing. They both paused, then laughed, small, but enough to make Lila's heartbeat jump. Sorry, Ethan said at the same time she did. We need some kind of traffic rule, Lila joked. Should I defer to you? He offered. Or we just bend at the same time, she countered, and they laughed again. When Lila picked up a familiar book, Ethan offered a hand at precisely the same moment, their fingertips grazing. It was barely a touch, the kind that should have been forgettable. But warmth flared anyway, sharp and immediate, settling somewhere beneath her ribs. Ethan felt it too. He pulled his hand back first, not abruptly, not awkwardly, then looked at her a second longer than necessary. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't heavy. It was soft, as if they both acknowledged something had shifted, and there was no need to define it. What did you find? He asked, breaking the quiet. A book I read in college, Lila said, holding it up. I thought I'd forgotten it. Old books are good at reminding people of who they used to be, Ethan said. Yeah, she nodded, then smiled. But not in a regrettable way. They stood side by side, each holding a few books, sunlight slipping across their shoulders and hands. Lila realized she wasn't thinking about what to say next or how far she should stand. She was simply here, careful enough not to leap ahead, comfortable enough not to retreat. When they left the fair with light bags of books, Ethan slowed his steps to match hers. You picked the perfect spot, he said. I like the way time behaves here. That's the criteria, Lila replied. Places that don't rush you. He nodded as if committing it to memory. They stopped at the edge of the square where the road split in two directions. Neither rushed to say goodbye. It was a brief, gentle pause, like both were deciding how to stretch this just a bit longer. Thank you for the morning, Ethan said finally, and for choosing old books for someone who doesn't read enough mysteries. Lila smiled. You're a quick study. Maybe the teacher's good, he answered. She laughed, feeling strangely lighter. When they parted ways, Lila walked off with a clear realization. Caution doesn't kill sweetness. It just makes it real, slower, and something worth waiting for. There was one thing neither Lila nor Ethan ever said out loud in the days following the used book fair. They had begun deliberately making room for each other in their schedules. Not in any dramatic way, just small spaces kept unconsciously intact. An evening left unplanned, a weekend morning with no rush, a brief text sent with simple words, "Are you free at 6? Or do you want to take a walk?" They met a few more times, each one in an entirely ordinary way. A small diner that served hot soup and crusty bread, where Lila talked about her workday, and Ethan listened as if she were describing something genuinely worth considering. An afternoon walk around the lake, where they moved so slowly that joggers passed them, Ethan joking that this might be the only pace that truly suited him. There was even one evening spent sitting on a wooden bench outside an ice cream shop, sharing a vanilla cone that melted faster than expected, laughing at how clearly they both remembered the other's smallest details. A throwaway line, a fleeting expression. Comfort arrived quietly, not hurried, not needing to be sealed with early promises. So when Ethan suggested dinner at a small restaurant on the north side of the city, not fancy but calm, Lila nodded without much thought. She chose a simple dress that fell past her knees and wore her familiar flats. When Ethan arrived, he was in a light blue shirt with the sleeves neatly rolled up, tidy as always. Nothing suggested the evening would be any different from the ones before, until the server addressed him as Mr. Cole with excessive care. Lila didn't notice it at first, just a small detail, passing through the middle of an unfinished conversation. But then the way the manager came over to check on them, the way the staff withdrew just enough not to intrude, the discreet glances, all of it arranged itself, like quiet puzzle pieces beginning to fit together. Ethan noticed it too. He let out a soft breath, as if he had known this moment would come sooner or later. Lila, he said once they had ordered, his tone still calm but carrying something carefully set down. There's something I need to tell you. Her heart slowed by a beat, not from fear but from instinct telling her this wasn't a small thing. That sounds serious. It's not serious, he smiled, his eyes steady. It's just true. She waited. I run the consulting company I mentioned, Ethan said. Not a small office, a corporation, and he paused at exactly the right moment. I'm the CEO. Lila blinked. Oh, a short silence, then a longer one. And because of that, he continued, his voice a little lower, I have more money than most people. Lila tilted her head. How much more? Ethan looked at her, clearly deciding to be honest rather than evasive. Enough for the press to call me a billionaire. She sat still. 1 second. 2. 3. Then Lila laughed. Quick, unfiltered laughter that escaped before she could stop it, drawing glances from nearby tables. Wait, so you're telling me I've been dating a billionaire? He nodded, not laughing, watching her carefully. Lila lifted a hand to her forehead and leaned back slightly. So my sweatshirt... She stopped, then looked at him, half serious, half helpless. Who exactly did it, fool? Ethan laughed, relieved, as if he had just crossed a difficult threshold. Quite a few people, probably. That's not fair, she shook her head. I thought my strategy was foolproof. You weren't wrong, he said. You just happened to meet someone who wasn't distracted. Lila stayed quiet for a while longer, this time letting her feelings catch up. Billionaire. CEO. The words hovered between them, heavier than ink on paper, heavier even than the warm air in the restaurant. She thought about her classroom, her simple dinners, the way she counted small expenses each morning, and then about the man sitting across from her who listened to those things as if they were the only real world that existed. Why tell me now, she asked. Because I didn't want you to find out some other way, Ethan replied, and because it felt like the right time. She nodded slowly as though rearranging drawers in her mind. Okay, then we need to be clear about a few things. He leaned forward slightly. I'm listening. First, Lila said, calmer than she expected to be, I pay my share. Not because you can't, but because I need to feel like I'm standing on my own 2 feet. Agreed, Ethan said immediately without hesitation. Second, she continued, I move slowly, very slowly. I'm not good with things that are too big, too fast. He looked at her, his expression softening with something like respect. I don't like running either, he said. Slow sounds good to me. And third, Lila took a deep breath, your money does not get to decide who I am or how I live. It doesn't have that right, Ethan replied firmly. I liked who you are before this truth came out. Nothing changes that. She studied him for a long moment, searching for even a trace of reluctant compromise, and found none. Only patience and a hint of relief. Lila exhaled softly, feeling as if she had just crossed a narrow bridge without falling into the water. Okay, she said, finally smiling. So, do we continue? Ethan smiled back, without triumph, without display. Very much so. They returned to their meal, the conversation drifting back to familiar ground. But the space between them had shifted, not heavier, just more real. When Lila reached for her water glass, Ethan's hand moved toward it at the same moment, and they both paused, smiling softly at the coincidence. Outside, the city lights remained bright. At a quiet corner table, a secret had been placed on the surface, causing no fracture, no collapse, only clarifying what was already forming. And Lila realized that of all the possibilities she had feared, the most surprising was not that Ethan was very rich, but that his wealth didn't stand between them at all. Rumors don't arrive with a knock. They slip into your life like cold air through a window crack. Barely noticeable at first, just enough to make you shiver, and then suddenly everywhere. It began with a name flashing across Lila's phone screen on Monday morning, right as she set her bag down on the teacher's desk and powered up her computer for the first class of the day. Have you seen this yet? Maya's message followed by a link. Lila didn't tap it immediately. Something in her instincts pulled her hand back, as if what waited there wasn't text, but something sharp. She clicked anyway. The article was short, the headline louder than necessary. A few grainy, long-distance shots taken without permission. A quote from a close source, and the line that knotted her stomach. Elementary teacher and reclusive billionaire? Love story or calculated move? Lila sat frozen for a long moment, the noise of students outside the classroom fading into a distant hum. The article called her an ordinary teacher, a plain woman, an inexplicable choice. Then came the questions, not explicit but obvious enough, about her motives, about money, about what someone like her was doing next to someone like Ethan. Lila locked the screen just before the bell rang. She thought she could handle it, that if it existed only online, she could pretend she hadn't seen it, the way she'd ignored many other things in her life. But by recess, as she stood in the first-floor hallway helping students line up, a man she didn't recognize stood beyond the school gate. Camera in hand, lens long and unmistakably pointed at her. He raised it. Lila froze. The courtyard, usually alive with laughter and sneakers slapping concrete, suddenly felt cavernous. Another teacher stepped instinctively between them. "Excuse me," she said loudly. "This is school property." The man didn't answer, just lowered the camera a fraction, eyes still locked on Lila, as though she were an object, not a person. Lila walked back inside, her legs trembling ever so slightly. That feeling, being watched, judged, turned into a narrative she didn't control, dragged her backward into a memory she thought she'd escaped. She locked her classroom door, sat at her desk, fingers interlaced so tightly her palms dampened with sweat. She called Ethan at lunch. "No, I know," he said before she could speak, his voice more tense than usual. "I'm sorry, Lila. I should have seen this coming." "There's someone outside the school," she said quietly. "They don't care that there are children here." A heavy silence. "I'll take care of it. I have a PR team." "No," Lila interrupted, so quickly she startled herself. "I don't want to be handled." Ethan paused. "What do you mean?" "I don't want a cleaner, more digestible version of myself appearing in the press," she said, the words stumbling over emotion. "I don't want articles saying I'm appropriate, respectable, suitable, as if I need editing to fit someone's standards." "I just want to protect you," Ethan said. "I know how to deal with the media. I can make this die down." "And in return for what?" Lila asked. "I stay quiet? I stand behind you in carefully chosen photos? I let other people tell my story?" Ethan exhaled. "That's not what I meant." "But it's what would happen," she replied, softer now, as though persuading herself. "I lost control of my life once. I'm not doing it again." The silence between them stretched, not from distance, but from the shared understanding that this was no longer just their problem. The conflict wasn't between them, but out there, clawing its way into their lives. "So what do you want to do?" Ethan asked at last. Lila leaned her forehead against the wall, the paint cool against her skin. "I don't know. I just know I can't keep going like this. I don't want to come to work feeling hunted." "There is one way," Ethan said slowly, choosing each word like he was stepping onto thin ice. "But I won't suggest it if you're not ready." "What way?" "Meet my family," he said. "Go public in a real way. Not a press event, not a statement. Just letting the people who matter to me know who you are, so the rumors don't have room to grow." Leela closed her eyes. His family, a world larger and sharper, bound by rules she hadn't written. She thought of the restaurant manager's gaze, of the word billionaire still foreign in her mouth. Then she saw herself that morning, inside her classroom, where everything once felt safe and defined. "What if they see me the way the press does?" she whispered. "Then I'll stand with you," Ethan said without hesitation. "Not because of PR, because I believe you." Lila opened her eyes. She stared at her faint reflection in the classroom window, a tired woman, afraid but unwilling to run. She inhaled, letting the old fear pass through her chest and settle behind her, instead of in front. "Okay," she said, voice trembling but firm. "We'll do it, but on one condition." "Tell me." "No staging, no polishing, no one speaks for me," Lila said. "I go as myself, or I don't go." "I promise," Ethan replied. "Just you." When the call ended, Lila sat alone, listening to the familiar sounds of children shouting in the yard. The fear didn't disappear. It curled up in her chest like something small and sharp. But beside it, something else grew. Determination not to let strangers write the story of her life. Outside, the cameras were still pointed her way. But for the first time since the rumors began, Lila didn't bow her head. She stood tall, locked the classroom door, and prepared to step into another world. Not to be accepted, but to prove she didn't need to be edited to be worthy. The wrought iron gates closed behind the car with a low, precise sound, like a full stop at the end of the public road behind them. Beyond that lay the entrance to the coal estate, a curved drive winding through perfectly trimmed lawns. Ancient trees standing motionless like gatekeepers who knew exactly what they were guarding. Ground lights washed up the tree trunks and the pale stone facade of the mansion, making everything look dignified and excessive. Lila swallowed. "Are you sure?" she asked, her hand unconsciously tightening on her purse strap. "We still have time to turn around and go back to that Italian place. I swear the pasta there is very reliable." Ethan smiled faintly, but not in a joking way. "I'm sure, but if you really want to turn the car around..." She stared straight ahead. The wide steps, the tall front door, everything seemed designed to make anyone entering acutely aware of their place. "No," Lila said, taking a deep breath. "I'm just reminding myself to breathe." He parked and turned toward her. "You're here because of me," Ethan said gently but firmly. "Not because of this house. If at any point you want to leave, we leave. No explanations." She nodded, her heartbeat slowing slightly. "Because of him," she repeated, clinging to the thought like a lifeline. Inside, the space opened wide and quiet, their footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor. A butler led them to the dining room with flawless courtesy. The room was long, the ceiling high, the table large enough for 10, but only 4 places had been set. The light was warmer than Lila expected, though not enough to erase the feeling of being watched. Eleanor Cole stood as they entered. Ethan's mother, silver hair neatly styled, posture straight, eyes sharp and composed, as if everything in the room had been weighed in advance. She shook Lila's hand, brief and proper. "Lila Brooks," she said, "at last." "Mrs. Cole," Lila replied evenly. "It's a pleasure." Daniel Cole appeared right after, Ethan's younger brother, younger and sharper in a distinctly less friendly way. His gaze swept over Lila from head to toe, lingered on her simple dress and flat shoes, then curved into a smile. "Interesting," Daniel said openly. "My brother does know how to surprise." "Daniel," Ethan said, warning in his tone. "I'm just stating a fact," Daniel shrugged. "The press would find it interesting, too." The dinner began with a politeness so stiff it felt suffocating. Eleanor asked Lila about her school, the curriculum, her family, questions that sounded thoughtful but were delivered with the precision of an interview. Daniel interjected with remarks that seemed harmless on the surface, about a modest pace of life, about different worlds, about adaptation. Lila answered, briefly, honestly. She didn't dodge anything, but she didn't try to prove herself either. She ate slowly, placed her cutlery carefully, acutely aware of the tension in every breath. Then Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough. "I'm curious," he said. "What is it about my brother that makes him worth stepping into this world?" The air froze. Lila set her knife down before answering. She looked directly at Daniel, then at Eleanor, and finally at Ethan, who sat very still, hands on the table, eyes never leaving her. "I'm here," Lila said evenly, neither raised nor subdued. "Not because of this world. I'm here because of Ethan." Daniel lifted an eyebrow. "Ah, because of his kindness," she continued, unhurried. "Because of the way he listens when I talk about small things and doesn't treat them as small. Because he doesn't look at what I wear or the balance of my bank account to decide who I am." Eleanor tilted her head slightly, her gaze shifting almost imperceptibly. "I'm not here to ask for permission," Lila went on, "and not to prove that I deserve anything. I'm here because he stood by me when the outside world wasn't kind, and tonight I came to do the same." Daniel gave a mocking laugh. "That sounds very nice." "No," Lila replied calmly. "It's just true." Ethan stood up. The chair scraping back rang clearly in the silent room. "Enough," he said, his voice low but unyielding. "If this dinner is meant to test her, then this dinner ends here." "Ethan," Eleanor began. "I love you, Mom," he said, turning to her, his voice softer but his resolve intact. But Lila is the person I chose. If she isn't respected, I'm not staying. He turned to Lila and held out his hand. We're leaving. She stood, her heart pounding but her back straight. When her hand slipped into his, Lila felt the steadiness there. Not overpowering protection, but someone standing beside her. They walked out of the dining room, down the long hallway, and into the cool night air. No one spoke until the iron gates closed behind them again, separating the brightly lit mansion from the dark road beyond. Lila let out a breath and leaned back against the seat. I thought I was going to faint. Ethan laughed, for the first time that night. You did really well. I was shaking, she admitted. I know, he said, and I'm proud of you. The car pulled away. The coal estate receded behind them, still grand, still unmoving. But in the small space of the car, Lila felt one thing with absolute clarity. She hadn't lowered her head, and for the first time, a dinner not meant for the faint-hearted had ended in a way she could live with, without betraying herself. The silence after dinner at the coal estate was nothing like the peace Lila had hoped for. It followed them home, settled into the car seats, slipped into every gap between their usual exchanges. Ethan hadn't changed. He still texted to ask if she got home safely, still remembered the exact brand of low-fat milk she liked, still listened, but Lila felt an invisible thread stretched tight, and she didn't know which end would snap first. The message arrived on a weeknight while she was grading papers in her small apartment. Not from the press, not from Maya, from Ethan. We need to talk. Just 6 words, polite, measured, and enough to make Lila set her pen down and close her eyes for a second. She called him immediately. I'm home, she said before he could speak. You can come over if you want. Ethan arrived quickly. He stood in her narrow living room, surrounded by bookshelves and a tiny dining table, as if afraid to touch anything without permission. Lila noticed, and it made her chest heavier. My family hired someone to investigate you, Ethan said at last, blunt and without detours. Specifically Daniel. Lila stilled. She wasn't surprised, just tired. A familiar exhaustion pressed down on her. What did they find? A debt, he said, voice lowering. A big one, from your ex. The air thickened. Lila sat at the edge of the couch, fingers twisting together. So they have proof. Not the proof they think, Ethan said quickly. I know you didn't, but they think it, Lila cut in, lifting her gaze. And now you know too. Ethan stepped closer, slowly, as if she might spook. I know you paid for that relationship long after it ended, he said. I didn't know the cost was this high. You shouldn't have to carry it alone. She let out a dry laugh. I already did. Lila, he said gently, let me help. The words landed softly, and because of that, they hurt more. How? She asked, barely above a whisper. You write a check? Ethan didn't flinch. I can pay it off. Tomorrow. No one has to know. I'll know, Lila replied, her voice trembling. And eventually everyone will, one way or another. You don't have to prove anything, he insisted. You don't owe them. But I owe myself, she said, rising, unable to hide the emotion anymore. If I accept your help, then I am exactly what they say, a woman whose life gets fixed because a rich man decided so. That isn't pity, Ethan said, tension sharp in his tone. It's love. Lila held his gaze for a long beat. Are you sure? She asked quietly. Or do you just hate watching me struggle, so you want to erase the problem? He didn't answer. The silence, short as it was enough to make Lila feel reduced to a role she despised, someone waiting to be rescued. You don't understand, she said, voice cracking. I lost everything because I trusted the wrong man. I've spent years scraping myself back, tutoring after hours, giving up vacations, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner just to repay a debt I shouldn't have had. That's how I survived. If you take that struggle from me. I don't want to take anything, Ethan interrupted. I just want you to hurt less. But that pain is mine, Lila said. It isn't pretty, it isn't poetic, but it's the reason I can stand on my own. The small apartment suddenly felt too tight. Lila walked to the window. Outside, the city lights glowed, indifferent to the implosion happening here. I need time, she said, not turning around. Not to run, just to make sure that if I stay, I don't lose myself. How long? Ethan asked, voice rough. She shook her head. I don't know. But if you love me, don't turn that love into a rescue mission. Silence stretched between them. Then slowly, I hear you, Ethan said. He didn't try to hold her, didn't argue. He nodded once, walked to the door, paused like he had something else to say, then left without saying it. When the door closed, Lila slid down the wall, her back pressed against it. The tears came quietly, not because he was wealthy, not because of the debt, but because she had finally understood something terrifying. The greatest fear in love isn't abandonment. It's being loved in a way that makes you smaller. And she wasn't ready to let that happen. Lila wasn't saying she didn't believe in Ethan's love. She just didn't yet know how to exist in this relationship without disappearing. A week passed in a way neither of them wanted, yet both accepted in silence, as if it were the necessary price to avoid hurting anything further. For Ethan, time collapsed into a series of work blocks. The office lights stayed on late. Meetings ran back to back without gaps. Charts, numbers, decisions, everything he had always controlled so well, now became a refuge. When his mind stayed busy enough to leave no room for emotion, the pain eased slightly. At least that was the idea. Yet every time his phone vibrated with a new email, his hands still stalled for half a second, an instinct he couldn't unlearn. Lila's messages never came, and he didn't send the lines he typed and deleted over and over until they became more familiar than any report on his desk. I'm here if you need me. Too much pressure. I'm sorry for making things harder. Sounds like an excuse. I miss you. Too soon. Too selfish. Ethan placed the phone face down on the desk and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He was used to solving problems with decisive action, but this time the only right move was to do nothing. And that was harder than any deal he had ever closed. Every night returning to his large, silent apartment, he thought about Lila's small space, the crowded bookshelves, the table just big enough for two, and wondered whether the vastness of his life had unintentionally made her feel out of place. Across the city, Lila's week passed to the sound of class bells, stacks of notebooks to grade, and 8-year-olds who didn't allow any adult to sink into gloom for too long. She stood at the front of the classroom, teaching fractions, mediating arguments over colored pencils, listening to rambling stories, and in those moments, she was fine. At least she looked fine. But there were very small moments slipping between the rhythms of daily life, when longing surfaced without warning. A student's question about dividing things evenly made her think of Ethan, who always divided things with care. A light, rainy afternoon brought back the first cafe, the old sweatshirt, and the smile that never looked at clothes. She realized she was still subconsciously keeping an empty space in her schedule, as if he might still step into it at any moment. Maya was the first to refuse to tolerate the silence. She appeared outside Lila's classroom after school, carrying 2 to-go coffees, her expression leaving no room for escape. You look like you're trying to convince the whole world that you're fine, Maya said, handing her one. But I know you too well. Lila exhaled and leaned against the teacher's desk. I'm okay. I'm just tired. Tired from missing him, Maya corrected, and from pretending you don't. Lila didn't argue. She stayed quiet for a few seconds, then spoke softly. It's not that I don't believe he loves me. Maya tilted her head. Then what is it? I don't know how to love again when everything is this complicated, Lila said slowly. I'm afraid that if I take another step forward, I'll lose what I worked so hard to rebuild. Maya looked at her, serious this time. He never loved the sweatshirt, she said. He loves you, the version of you without defenses, the version that speaks honestly, that stands up for herself. Lila smiled sadly. That's exactly why I'm scared. Scared of what? Scared that I'm not strong enough to both keep myself and be with him, Lila said. You know how my last relationship messed me up around money, being used, being hurt. I need to know that if we choose each other, it's 2 people standing side by side, not one rescuing and one being rescued. Maya rested a hand on her shoulder. Then that's exactly what you should tell him. Don't hide inside silence. Night fell. Lila returned to her small apartment, ate a simple dinner, turned on her familiar podcast, but couldn't focus. She picked up her phone and stared at the blank screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Somewhere else, almost at the same time, Ethan was holding his phone too, and both of them paused at the same beat, as if waiting for the other to breathe first. The week without each other passed, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken thoughts, questions not yet dared, and a truth growing clearer by the day. Missing someone doesn't make you weaker. It only forces you to be more honest with yourself. And somewhere beneath that silence, which felt so deceptively safe, both of them were moving closer to the same decision. Not to run away, but to turn back, this time with steadier feet. Night had sunk deep by the time Lila stood outside Ethan's apartment door, fingers clutching the strap of her bag without remembering when she'd picked it up. She hadn't changed clothes, hadn't put on makeup, just threw a thin hoodie over her usual sleepwear, hair tied up haphazardly with a rubber band, stray strands falling over her forehead as if protesting her decision to leave the house at this hour. She knew she didn't look like someone arriving to say something important, and that was exactly why she came. The door opened after a brief hesitation. Ethan stood there in an old t-shirt and sweatpants, looking as though he too had been dragged out of some heavy train of thought. When he saw Lila, he froze, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer, warmer almost instantly. "You," he began. "I'm sorry," Lila blurted out before fear could wedge itself into her throat. "I didn't call because if I had, I probably wouldn't have come." Ethan stepped aside without a single question. "Come in," he said quietly. No interrogation, no resistance. His apartment was quiet, bathed in soft lighting, the faint smell of old coffee lingering in the air. It was larger than hers, but at this moment, it didn't swallow her whole. Lila stood in the living room, hands clasped, breath still uneven. "I know you respected the silence," she said, eyes tracing the grain of the wooden floor. "And I know that wasn't easy for you." "I respected you," Ethan replied. "A little different." She lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes for the first time since stepping inside. "I'm afraid," Lila said, the raw honesty in her voice surprising even herself. "Not because of the money or your family, but because I've lost too much to become who I am now. I'm terrified that if I let go even a little, I'll slip back to who I used to be." Ethan didn't interrupt, didn't move closer. He simply listened, anchored but not imposing. "But in that silence," she continued, voice trembling just slightly, "I realized something even scarier." She inhaled. "I'm more afraid of losing you." His eyes flickered, the words landing somewhere honest and unguarded. Lila stepped forward, only half a pace, shrinking the space between them without erasing it. "I don't need to be saved," she said. "I need someone to walk with me. And I was terrified that if I said that out loud, you'd think I was pushing you away." "I would never think that," Ethan answered immediately. Then he paused, choosing his words with the care of someone who finally understands what the moment requires. "I want to walk beside you, Lila, not ahead of you, not dragging you behind, just next to you." Lila let out a shaky laugh, tears spilling before she could stop them. "I know. I just needed to hear it said like that." Ethan moved then, not quickly, not dramatically. He stepped close enough that his warmth reached her, but not so close she felt cornered. Then he opened his arms without touching her, until Lila closed the distance herself. She stepped into him without hesitation. His arms wrapped around her, solid, steady, not restrictive, like a promise carried in muscle rather than words. Lila rested her forehead against his chest, her breathing syncing with the quiet, dependable beat of his heart, slow, sure, unhurried. They stayed like that for a long time. No repeated apologies, no grand promises, just two people choosing to return, wiser, steadier. Finally, Ethan whispered, voice low against her ear, "Thank you for coming." Lila nodded, not needing to look up. "Thank you for waiting." Outside, the city kept moving at its reckless pace, but inside this still apartment, something essential had been set right. Not with wealth, not with power, but with the choice to stand beside each other, once both were strong enough not to need anyone leading the way. There were evenings that didn't begin with a plan, only with a quiet question. "Do you want to say more?" Lila sat on the rug in Ethan's living room, her back against the sofa, both hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had already cooled. She took a deep breath, then began to speak. This time the story didn't stumble or dodge. She talked about the debt the way one talks about a long winter. Numbers, signatures taken advantage of, months of tutoring on the side, nights of rushed meals, telling herself that everything would be all right if she endured long enough. Ethan didn't interrupt. He sat across from her, as still as an apprentice, taking in every detail, not to argue but to understand. When Lila finished, the room fell quiet for a moment, not a heavy silence, but the kind that honors what has just been offered. "It can be fixed," Ethan said at last without raising his voice. "Not with money, by putting things back where they belong." She looked at him, waiting. "Those debts," he continued, "show signs of fraud. I have a friend who's a lawyer. Very good, very discreet. If you're willing, just for a consultation, to see whether there's a legal path forward." Lila considered it. She was used to carrying things on her own, but walking alongside someone meant allowing them to hold the lamp, not carry her across the river. "A consultation," she nodded. "Nothing more." The meeting was simple, in a small office overlooking the river. The lawyer, salt and pepper hair, an unhurried voice, listened, then asked the right questions. He pointed out concealed evidence, documents that could be traced, and expenses the law did not require Lila to bear. Ethan stayed quiet, stepping back completely. This was her part. The weeks that followed passed in short emails, a few document signings, and patient waiting. Then one afternoon, as Lila was grading papers, her phone vibrated. A message from the lawyer. "The debt has been reassigned to the responsible party. The amount you paid will be refunded." She read it twice, then pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat settle back into place. Ethan didn't hug her right away. He smiled first. The smile of a witness, not a benefactor. "You did this," he said. She smiled, her eyes burning. "Not alone. Two people standing side by side," he corrected. From then on, they lived slowly and quietly. No displays, no declarations. They dated like ordinary people. Dinner at familiar places, walks when the streets were empty, sitting together to rewatch an old movie no one remembered the name of. They split money naturally, the way they split everything else, sharing the details of their day, sharing silence when it was needed. Some nights meant takeout pizza, the box in the middle of the table, both reaching for the last slice and laughing like children because each had yielded too late. On other nights, Lila talked about her classroom. She told him about a boy who never raised his hand because he was afraid of being wrong, about a girl who once kept the whole class behind just to draw one more son. Ethan listened, leaning toward her, his gaze focused like someone learning something new. Not facts from a book, but how people grow when they're truly heard. "I've realized I learn the most when I don't talk," he admitted once. Lila smiled. "Welcome to third grade." The roles shifted, ever so slightly. She no longer had to prove her strength. He didn't need to assert power. Each brought to their table what they did best. She brought patience, he brought consistency, and together they built a life that fit. The city outside remained loud. The media could still ask questions. But in the world they were building, through ordinary evenings, well-placed decisions, and quiet respect, everything grew simpler. No one walked ahead. No one lagged behind. Just two people moving in the same rhythm, slow enough to hear themselves living. A classroom after school has a very particular kind of quiet, as if the room itself has exhaled after a long day. The little chairs are neatly lined up, the chalkboard still dusted with a faint haze of chalk, and a few drawings lie abandoned on the back table. An oversized orange sun, a blue cat, a stick figure family holding hands. Leela stood by the window gathering the last of the notebooks she hadn't taken home yet, feeling her familiar exhaustion settle in gently. She heard the door open softly behind her. "I'm sorry," Ethan said in a low voice, as though afraid to disturb the peace. "I'm a little late." Lila turned and smiled. "You're right on time. This is when the classroom feels the nicest." He walked in slowly, his gaze sweeping over the room, not like someone merely visiting, but like someone learning how to love a place that wasn't his. Ethan paused between two rows of desks, bent down to pick up a fallen drawing, and placed it back where it belonged. A small, natural gesture, and because of that, Lila's heart tripped over itself. Do you ever think, she teased, that you're trespassing in third grade territory? I think third grade will forgive me, he replied, as long as I don't touch the crayon box. They laughed quietly. The room softened around them, familiar in the way their pizza on the floor evenings always were. Ethan stood in the middle of the classroom, then lowered himself to one knee. Not ceremoniously, not staged, just enough so their eyes were perfectly level. Time seemed to stop. Lila, he said, voice steady and low, neither rushed nor trembling. I've thought a lot about where I want to say this. Not a restaurant, not a stage. Here, because this is where I see you most clearly. Her hand flew to her chest on instinct, her heart pounding far too fast for such a small body. I don't want to promise something grand, Ethan continued, pulling out a simple ring, a small circle of warm metal that caught the fluorescent light without flaunting itself. I just want to promise that I'll walk beside you, every day, not leading, not pulling, just with you. The tears came quickly, unexpectedly. You know, she whispered, voice shaking, I don't need someone to change my life. I know, Ethan nodded. I just hope to be in it. Lila inhaled, offering the most Lila condition possible. I want to keep my old apartment for a while. He smiled, the kind of smile that unlocked everything. As long as you pick the pizza. Always, she laughed through her tears. She nodded. No speech, no spectacle. Ethan stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. It settled there perfectly, as though it had always known where it belonged. They held each other among the tiny chairs, arms tight but unhurried, letting the quiet peace soak into their bones. A few weeks later, they began something new. Not loud, not headline-worthy. A children's book center opened in their old neighborhood, its windows catching the afternoon sun, its floors low enough for kids to sit cross-legged and read. Lila managed it, choosing books, organizing story hours. Ethan stayed behind the scenes, building shelves, making sure things worked, and stopping there. Her name was on the door. So was her joy. Some evenings after closing the center, they would return to Lila's old apartment, pizza boxes on the table, laughter tangled with the smell of fresh pages. Ethan listened as she recounted children discovering their first favorite book. Lila listened as he learned how to say more by saying less. In the classroom after hours, the promise had been made the right way, without shrinking anyone, without forcing someone to stand behind the other. Just two adults choosing each other and choosing to build something simple, steady, and profoundly real. The wedding took place on a late spring morning when the sunlight was gentle enough that no one had to squint, and the breeze was light enough that the paper streamers hanging from the ceiling only trembled softly as if breathing. There was no red carpet, no professional event team, no stage, only the reading center, where the scent of fresh paper mingled with paint and children's laughter rang out in a way that could never be choreographed. Lila's students were the official decorating team. They carefully cut paper flowers, glued on glittering stars, and hung colorful garlands that sat slightly crooked, but which they were immensely proud of. A large sign at the front bore a wobbly handwritten message, wishing Ms. Lila and Uncle Ethan happiness. Ethan watched from a distance, sleeves rolled up, stepping in to straighten a crooked strand before turning to Lila with a smile that told her he was fully present in this moment. Lila walked in wearing a simple dress, no beading, no train, nothing that needed adjusting. Her hair fell naturally, her face free of heavy makeup, just enough to look like a very beautiful morning of herself. Ethan waited for her at the end of the room, in a neat but unshowy suit, his gaze steady and warm, the same way he always looked at her. Their families sat intermingled, close enough to hear one another breathe. Eleanor Cole sat in the front row, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes no longer sharp as they had been the first time they met, replaced instead by a quiet acknowledgement. Daniel sat beside her, back straight, his expression far more serious than before. When his gaze met Lila's, he gave a small nod. No flourish, no ceremony, but enough to say that some lessons only come after one has stood in the wrong place. The vows were brief, no promises to change each other, no promises to carry anyone's burdens in their place, just words suited to two adults, to walk together, to be honest with each other, and to never make the other feel smaller in any room. When Ethan slid the ring onto Lila's finger, she smiled, a smile that didn't need tears to prove anything. When it was her turn, Lila took his hand and gave it a gentle squeeze, like a habit formed long ago. They kissed amid applause and the children's giggles, surrounded by the scent of paper and sunlight. No one called it a billionaire's wedding. No one whispered about the dress or the ring. People simply saw two very real people choosing each other, in front of children, being taught that the world can be gentle. Life afterward didn't change in the way outsiders might imagine. Lila still went to class every morning, writing with chalk on the board, listening to innocent stories, teaching children how to read and how to believe in kindness. Ethan was still a billionaire, still signing major deals, still running a world most people only saw through headlines. But in the evenings, when the door closed, he learned to fold Lila's old sweatshirt a little more neatly, learned to wait his turn to speak, and learned that real success sometimes means simply being there at the right moment. Friday nights became an unbreakable ritual. Takeout pizza, the cardboard box set in the middle of the table, a true crime podcast is playing steadily in the background. Lila curled up in her faded gray sweatshirt, sometimes resting her feet on Ethan's lap to claim more space. He let her, an arm draped around her shoulders, no need to check his phone, no need to be anywhere else. They sat there, very ordinary, and completely enough. If anyone asked what their happiness looked like, the answer wouldn't be in wedding photos or bank balances. It would be in evenings that didn't require makeup, proof, or brilliance. Some loves begin when we deliberately choose not to shine and are loved not for the glow, but for who we truly are.